Hello, all you freedom-loving people. The Israel-Hamas ceasefire and hostage agreement has been reached. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was arrested while President Trump's nominees are being affirmed. Okay, let's get into it. A breakthrough has been made in the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Negotiators met again in Qatar on Tuesday to finalize the details of the agreement. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that a hostage and ceasefire deal is ready to be concluded and implemented if Hamas accepts the agreement. Blinken said, "I believe we will have a ceasefire." Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson Majed al-Ansari said on Tuesday that Hamas and Israel are closer to reaching a ceasefire hostage agreement than they have been at any time in the past few months. At the press conference, he said that the purpose of the indirect talks between Israel and Hamas was to finalize specific details of the Gaza ceasefire hostage agreement. Hamas said that the talks were in the final stage. They also said that they hope the latest round of talks would lead to a clear and comprehensive agreement. A Palestinian source with knowledge of the talks told Reuters that he expected the deal to be finalized on Tuesday if everything goes well. An Israeli source said that the Israeli government was ready for a ceasefire. A majority in Israel's government will support the emerging Gaza ceasefire for hostages deal, according to Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar. He told CNN, "We think that we've made all the compromises that are needed to bring a deal. It's in the hands of Hamas, and they need to make this decision." And the first phase of the deal was agreed upon today and will take effect on Sunday. Today, President Joe Biden briefed the nation on the deal and gave some hints about the next phases.
During the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent.
President Joe Biden also remarked that his people and the incoming administration of President Trump worked together on making the deal a reality.
For the most part, by the next administration. In these past few days, we've been speaking as one team. This has been a time of real turmoil in the Middle East. But as I prepare to leave office, our friends are strong, our enemies are weak, and there's genuine opportunities for a new future.
President Trump also reacted to the news. He wrote on Truth Social, "We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you." This epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. I am thrilled American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be reunited with their families and loved ones. In a statement, Netanyahu's office said that final details were still unresolved, but that it hoped details will be finalized tonight. Hamas is expected to release 33 hostages during the first phase of the emerging ceasefire agreement. In exchange, Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including some convicted of killing Israelis. Israeli officials said that it was impossible to say exactly how many Palestinian prisoners that Israel would release because Hamas has not yet revealed how many hostages had died. The agreement is divided into 3 phases. In the first phase, 33 hostages, including women, children, the elderly, and wounded civilians, will be gradually released over a period of 6 weeks in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian women and children who may be imprisoned in Israel. The 33 hostages include 5 female Israeli soldiers, which means that each of them will be released in exchange for 50 Palestinian prisoners. By the end of the first phase, all captured civilians, alive or dead, would be released or have their remains retrieved during the first 42-day period. The Israel Defense Forces will withdraw from the heavily populated town of Gaza. Palestinians will be allowed to begin returning to their homes in northern Gaza. Humanitarian assistance will enter with approximately 600 trucks per day. Details of the second phase are still subject to consultation in the first phase, so details are still uncertain. And the agreement does not include written assurances that the ceasefire will continue until an agreement is reached. This makes it possible for Israel to resume military operations after the end of the first phase. According to the draft agreement, in the second phase, Hamas would release the remaining prisoners, who are mainly male soldiers, in exchange for groups of prisoners and complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. In the third phase, the remains of the remaining hostages would be returned in exchange for a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan to be implemented in Gaza under international supervision. News of the ceasefire agreement and the release of the hostages spread through the Israeli stock exchange, and stock prices rose. The nomination process for President Trump's cabinet picks has officially begun. Senate hearings began on Tuesday, January 14th at 9:30 a.m. Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. The former Fox and Friends weekend host is a graduate of Princeton and holds a graduate degree from Harvard University. He served as an Army officer in Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, and Afghanistan. During his service, he was awarded 2 bronze medals and an Infantryman's Combat Medal. He is one of the more controversial nominees at present. He criticized the woke agenda as having weakened the military's readiness. In his opening statement, Hegseth promised to reinvent the fighting spirit, rebuild the military, and restore deterrence if the nomination is approved. Hegseth also said in his opening remarks, "Trump, like me, wants a Pentagon laser-focused on lethality, meritocracy, war fighting, accountability, and readiness. We will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional." Democratic lawmakers pressed Hegseth's past comments about female service members and his allegations of sexual misconduct and alcohol abuse. Republican lawmakers, meanwhile, praised him as a game changer needed to break down the military bureaucracy. The new chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Republican Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, acknowledged that Hegseth is an unusual nominee, but said that's exactly why he could be an excellent choice, and drew an analogy between him and President Trump. Hegseth also vowed that all service members who were involuntarily removed from service for refusing the COVID-19 vaccination would be reinstated with back pay. He said, not only will they be reinstated, they will receive an apology, back pay, and rank that they lost because they were forced out due to an experimental vaccine. Democratic lawmakers cited a number of reasons for their opposition, including sexual assault allegations, concerns about financial malfeasance at the veterans nonprofit he runs, past stances against women in combat, and a lack of experience running a large organization. Hegseth responded that the allegations were a smear campaign by left-wing media organizations, and he declined to address the details. Of course, not all senators inspect Hegseth from a political point of view, but from a professional point of view. The following is a conversation between Senator Tim Sheehy and Pete Hegseth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete, I'm actually going to ask you questions because I want to hear your answer. How many genders are there? Tough one.
Senator, there are 2 genders.
I know that well. I'm a Sheehy, so I'm on board. What is the diameter of the rifle round fired out of an M4A1 rifle?
That's a 5.56.
How many push-ups can you do?
I did 5 sets of 47 this morning.
What do you think are most important strategic bases in the Pacific?
In the Pacific, Guam is pretty strategically significant.
How many rounds of 5.56 can you fit into the magazine of an M4 rifle?
Depends on the magazine, but standard issue is 30, Senator.
And what size round does the M9 Beretta standard issue sidearm for the military fire?
A 9mm, Senator.
What kind of batteries do you put in your night vision goggle?
Duracell?
So right there, you're representing qualifications that show you understand what the warfighter deals with every single day on the battlefield. You understand what happens on the front line, where our troops will be. And what happens, unfortunately, in this country is decisions made in rooms like this, bad decisions, end up in dead 17, 18, 19-year-old Americans. And those Americans rarely come from families that sit in rooms like this. They come from lower, middle-income families who sometimes the military is their only way out. And they join because maybe they want to go to college. Maybe they had no other choice. Maybe they love this country. But for whatever reason, they joined and they sat on the dotted line. And when people like us screw up, they don't come home. And that's the one thing that I care about. As you remember when I shut the door, when you came with your entourage, Senator Coleman, I've known for a long time, and you and I sat together, asked you one question. You remember what that question was?
Are you going to have the backs of the warfighters?
Exactly. What is going to be your number one priority? And I don't care, frankly, what all these letters and articles say. I've been a part of a smear campaign too, I get it. I care that you're going to have one thing in mind when you sit in that chair in that five-sided building, and you told me what that was. So with that, you have my support. I'm sorry you have to go through a process like this.
Actually, Hegseth's nomination only needs enough Republican support to be confirmed. Currently, Republicans are the majority party in the Senate with 53 seats. A nominee needs a simple majority of 51 votes, and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance can cast the deciding vote if necessary. So even if all Democrats vote against the nominee can still pass, as long as he or she does not lose more than 3 Republican votes. One of the Republicans who had originally expressed concerns about the nomination was Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. She said after the hearing late on Tuesday that she would support his nomination. She said, "He was adequately able to answer all of my questions. He pointed out the woke issues at the Pentagon, and I think we're at a point where now we can start moving forward. Yes, I will be supporting President Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth." Senate Majority Leader John Thune expressed confidence that Pete Hegseth will secure confirmation as the next Secretary of Defense. Secretary of State nominee Senator Marco Rubio, Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi, and other Trump cabinet picks faced confirmation hearings today. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a senior Democratic member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, predicts strong bipartisan support for Rubio. Senate Democrats can raise procedural objections to slow down progress on the confirmation of Trump's most controversial nominees, but they are also beginning to realize that unless the nominee performs badly in his confirmation hearing, it is unlikely that any fatal blow will be struck. South Korean investigators on Wednesday arrested President Yoon Suk-yeol over his short-lived martial law declaration last month. This was the second attempt by the investigating authorities to execute an arrest warrant. Earlier, the acting president of Korea warned against any conflict during the execution of the warrant for the arrest of Yoon Suk-yeol. Otherwise, the officers involved would be held accountable. The acting president is nonpartisan, so it seems that he does not want to get involved in complicated partisan disputes. The arrest began at 4:20 a.m. on Wednesday morning. About 3,000 police officers gathered in front of the presidential palace. This time, the police and investigating officials had also learned a lesson from the last failure. They mobilized 1,200 people, 10 times the size last time, to enter the residence, and there were only about 200 presidential security personnel. Therefore, they were extremely disadvantaged in terms of numbers. Despite a standoff within the presidential office security for about 2.5 hours, the investigators were able to get through 3 layers of barricades that were set up by the security, and they managed to move forward. During the process, the investigators had to use a ladder to climb over the bus. At 8:15 a.m., they arrived at the nearest guard post to the presidential residence. Eventually, with the consent of the director of the office and the president of Korea and the president's council, several individuals were allowed to pass through the guard post and enter the residence. An investigation official told Yonhap news agency, unlike during the first attempt, there were no personnel or presidential security service staff actively resisting the execution. President Yoon said that he regards the investigation as illegal and that he allowed himself to be arrested in order to avoid a violent incident. In a lengthy post that was accompanied by a photo of his handwritten letter that addressed the public, Yoon stated, "Martial law is not a crime. Martial law is an exercise of presidential authority to overcome a national crisis." In a pre-recorded video message on Wednesday, Yoon said, "To prevent an unfortunate and violent incident, I decided to appear before the CIO even though I believe the investigation is illegal." The CIO is the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. A large crowd gathered outside the presidential residence during the execution of the arrest warrant. Police estimated that about 6,500 supporters of Yoon Suk-yeol were present to show their solidarity. Among the crowd were about 30 members of the ruling party. However, the police entered the residence from a number of points, including from the rear of the compound. This arrest was also possible because the CIO had warned last week that members of the Presidential Police Service would be arrested if they prevented the arrest of the president. Those who cooperated with the arrest were treated with leniency. The director of the Presidential Security Agency, who last directed the Presidential Security Detail to resist the arrest, has resigned in the face of an alleged obstruction of justice investigation. Before resigning, he again criticized the attempt to detain Yoon Suk-yeol. He stated that the investigation should be conducted in a manner befitting a sitting president and in a manner that upholds the dignity of the nation. He also said that he had called the acting president several times, urging him to coordinate alternatives with law enforcement, but he had not received a satisfactory response. On the other hand, the CIO also criticized the acting president for refusing to direct the Presidential Security Service to cooperate in the execution of the warrant. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because some of our audience have reported that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. We've also heard that many of you don't get notifications of our videos anymore on YouTube. So when you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure to tap the notification bell as well. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.